Go ahead and get started. Welcome. Thank you all for being here tonight. I am going to turn myself down because it's weird to hear myself so loudly. So let me adjust the volume here. No. What mic am I? Wireless too. Is that making me quieter? I don't think it is. Maybe a little bit. It's not showing the volume control, but I do feel like I'm a little quieter. Is it good? Okay. All right. Well, again, welcome and thank you all for being here. I'm really excited about this and excited to be with you and grateful to be with you. Your time is the most valuable thing that you have, and I'm always really grateful when you decide to spend some of it at church and spend it with us. So I'm excited for this evening and for the future sessions. So this class wears a lot of hats, okay? It's intended to do a number of different things. And actually, this is my second time teaching this. I did one around the same time last year, and one of the things that I enjoyed about it is that we do have this diversity of experiences and diversity of purposes in some ways in this class, because you have some folks who are new to St. Richard's but not new at all to the Episcopal Church. You know, maybe you've been Episcopalian your whole life. Maybe you were baptized as a child as an Episcopalian and then hadn't come back for a while. We had a couple of those last year in our class. Or maybe you are absolutely not familiar with the Episcopal Church at all, and you've just been visiting St. Richard's very recently. Or maybe you're a member of St. Richard's and you are ready to get confirmed. This class also serves as confirmation prep for adults. And so what I like about this is that all of those experiences come together and help shape our time together on what we learn and how we learn it. And so I'm glad that y'all are here. What we're going to do tonight is we will take some time and introduce ourselves so that we get to know people's names just a little bit, and also share just briefly why you are in this class, what brought you here, and maybe what you're hoping to learn, if you even know what that is. You may be like, I don't even know what I want to learn. I'm just here to figure out what's going on. And we'll do that so that we hear a little bit about each other's backgrounds and what's going on. And then the main content portion that we'll go through tonight is we'll talk a little bit about, when we're talking about the Episcopal Church, what is that? How are we structured? How does it run? And then about St. Richard's specifically, how does St. Richard's run? And a bit about the history of St. Richard's, our church, and also who is St. Richard anyway, right? Like, who is that guy? Who's the church named after? So we're going to talk about that. I will say that tonight's session is a little more structure and governance heavy. I hope it's not boring, okay? But the reason is I feel like it's important to establish kind of a baseline, so that in the next session in particular, when we start going into like the history of the Episcopal Church, which is actually really, really interesting and involves some murder and some royal intrigue and lots of things, it sort of makes sense. There's sort of a baseline of understanding of how the Episcopal Church works, and we'll talk about why and how we got here. We'll also in future sessions talk a bit about our theology, what we think about things like the sacraments, and we'll discuss those things, and how do Episcopalians read the Bible and approach Scripture, that sort of thing. And then we'll also talk a lot about our practices. Why do we do what we do? Why am I dressed funny on Sundays? What do those things mean? Why do we read from various portions of Scripture in the way that we do, et cetera, et cetera. We'll talk about all that and have lots of time along the way for discussion and questions and that sort of thing. Now, I will say this is a 4-session class, but I only have 3 sessions worth of material, and the reason is last year it took 4 sessions to get through the 3 sessions worth of material. And so I tell you that up front to say that today may go a little bit quick. I don't know. But we can take our time with the other ones, and if we sort of bleed over into another session or whatever, that's totally fine, okay? So that's a little bit about what we have today. You will also, now for the last little bit or so, and some of you are really, really new, like we have some people who have just been visiting, like the last couple of weeks, someone who just visited this morning. You can't get much newer to St. Richard's than that, okay? So they're like brand new, very fresh. But for those of you who've been around St. Richard's a little while, and you may have taken a Sunday school class with me or something like that where I had a slide deck, you will know that I'm notorious for not really abiding by my slides, getting very off topic, and then having to I'll get to a slide where I've just said everything that's on the slide before we got there, and so you just have to bear with me. I don't even know why I put these together. They're supposed to keep me on track, but honestly, it doesn't work very well. Okay, so just grace would be appreciated. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll open us with a bit of a prayer, and then we'll do some introductions and get going. So let us pray. Gracious God, I thank you for bringing us together today. I thank you for this chance to get to know one another better, to learn a bit more about this community of faith and how we love and serve you in it. I pray that you would bless our time together and be with us this evening. Help us to develop stronger relationships with one another as we seek to develop a stronger relationship with you. For it's in your name that we pray. Amen. All right, so I can already tell you that I think I just said some things that are on the next slide. So we'll go ahead and do introductions, and then hopefully by the time those are done, we'll forget about that. And when I go to the next slide, it will seem new and fresh, okay? So we'll go around, and like I said, it doesn't, just very briefly, I'd appreciate it if you'd share your name, and then again, what is your experience with St. Richard's? Like, what brings you here? What are you interested in? Maybe what you're interested in learning, and then that's really it. You don't have to come up with 2 truths and a lie or something like that. No icebreaker questions, but and in that, when I say what brings you here, particularly what is your religious background, whatever that looks like, and that could be I don't really have one. That's absolutely fine. We had a couple people last year that was their story, and that was pretty cool. So it's really just, again, to highlight the various experiences that are here in the room. So to be fair, I'll go first. My name is Cameron. I am the rector of St. Richard's, so I'm glad y'all are here. I'm the 5th rector of St. Richard's. There's been 4 before me, and we'll talk about that when we get to the church history section. And I actually grew up Southern Baptist, which, again, I reference a lot in sermons, so some of you may already know this. So I didn't grow up in the Episcopal Church. I found the Episcopal Church when I was in college. And it was, long story very short, is it was immediately a spiritual home for me. And I ended up, you see where that got me. Okay, so be careful, I guess, or you too may get ordained. But anyway, and so yes, I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and then found the Episcopal Church when I was actually in Central Illinois, and went to seminary at Sewanee, and have served congregations in Orlando, Florida, and Birmingham, Alabama before coming here. So in September of 2020. So I'm glad to be here. And I guess we'll go around this way. We'll do sort of this.
I'm Ron. I was Ron Morgan. I was born and raised a Roman Catholic, and over the course of the privilege to find myself moving away. The Episcopal Church is actually a place that I've been before with friends, and there's a level of comfort and familiarity.
Absolutely.
So this would be my opportunity to learn about that.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Sure. Sure.
That was part of my journey together.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
I'm Debbie Athenia, and I was brought here
Oh, man.
It causes you really to be more in the frame of mind of learning it. But what I love is as I'm learning it, I feel like, oh, I already knew that.
Mm.
That's a really good feeling to me. I feel like I grew up and I really learned everything that you're teaching me, and it's just repeating it is even better for me. I love that. I want to learn what I need to do here for this church, because for me, I feel like this is my church home. This is where I want to be. I don't see me anywhere else.
Mhm.
And I love everything about being here.
Mm.
I just don't understand when and what to say.
You're in the right place.
That's-
Perfect.
That's my story.
Thank you, Debbie, yeah. All right, Drew.
My name is Andrew Charles Shields, and when I was a baby, I used to go here. Then we moved to Celebration. Then we moved to Hill Country Bible Church. Then the coronavirus pandemic hit, and then went for a little bit at City View, and now we go here. And I've been, and I go there since September of 2021.
Mm-hmm. And you've served as an acolyte for a while as well, yeah. So thank you, Drew.
I served as an acolyte here.
That's right, that's right. Awesome. Jason?
My name is Jason. This is literally my second time in church for about 24 years.
That's awesome.
I moved here to Austin from New Orleans, where I spent most of my life. The reason why I'm here is through my dad. My dad is actually sick right now. I came looking for a church. I was raised Roman Catholic, but over the years my faith in the Roman Catholic Church has been waned, and it's not exactly what I'm about anymore. My wife actually suggested Episcopalian Church as well as your religion. So, like I said, this is only my second time back in church, but with my dad being sick, it's actually brought my faith back into perspective for me. So that's actually why I'm here right now. Go deeper into that, and hopefully see more.
Awesome. Thank you, thank you. Adam? You don't have to go if you don't want to. That's okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll introduce Adam. So Adam's been coming about a year and a half now to St. Richard's, and comes exclusively to the 8 a.m., that's pretty hardcore. So and is the designated bringer upper of the bread and the wine at communion. So yeah. And then George.
George Chapman. I'm the semi-retired CEO for IBM Business Development. I grew up in Chicago. I'm a lifelong I went to this in the early 60s. And I regard myself as, some of you may or may not identify, but I identify as a high church activist. I've been down in Texas more or less since '96. I did a couple of years over in London, St. Philip's Library. And most of my life in Texas, I've been down in South Austin, so I was part of St. David.
Nice.
And I've been up here since 2019.
Awesome.
I was up here for the Great Fire that was last.
Yes, I was going to say when the alarms went off. I've heard stories of this. Yeah.
And I love the Anglican Church. I love, you mentioned inclusiveness. I love what we call the gospel. It means a lot to me.
There you go. Yeah, brush up a little bit. Yeah, there you go. That's right. Well, thank you, George. All right, Roberta. Yeah, maybe a little bit longer. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. It feels like you've been around a long time, in a good way. In a good way. In a good way. Absolutely. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, and I don't want to, we should go back. Ken, you should also introduce yourself, even though you're behind the camera today. Yes. There you go. All right, Kate.
I'm KT, and I know Ken from 25 years ago in San Antonio. His mom and dad live right down the street from me. So I moved here on 21 August in San Antonio because my daughter said, Mom, you're getting to the age where I cannot drive down I-35 every time you need me. So come to me. So I moved to Round Rock and started looking for a church and but I was baptized in the Church of Christ, and of course, as you know, that's black and white. And by the time I was 20, I had questions, but I didn't know what the questions were or who to ask. But fortunately, I met my husband, Jack, and he was a great Episcopalian. And so he said, would you be willing to at least go with me and experience it? And I said, of course. So that was my salvation, and I was so indoctrinated in Christ that I went with him, but it took 7 years for me to confirm. We went to Italy and came back, and over there we went to Birch Garden for retreats, and they had some of the most famous speakers there, and I think that was like let me know that there's more than one right way, and it's not all black and white, there's shades of gray. So,
Thank you. Yeah, well, we're glad you're here. All right.
Yeah, Rick Green. I was raised Methodist and back in that church, downtown church, and decided I would do some searching and did all my homework on the various religions I might get faith on I go to, and I said, this to tell you is the way to go. I like the liturgy,
Here we go.
music, I like the ceremony, I like a little more high church than
Yeah.
other denominations have. And that was 1993. Joined St. David's downtown, lived there for a pretty good while, and left town for about 10 years. And since I've come back, I guess in 2013, I've shopped, I guess is the word, various churches at various times, and I've kind of, decided it was time to sort of put roots down in one. And I think this is definitely the Goldilocks before it's just right.
That's awesome. Okay, good.
Pretty even feel,
Yeah.
focusing on faith and the word, which I think is my reason for coming to church.
There you go.
But, if I could meet people along the way, that also be great, but here's the content, thus far, I'm very pleased.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. Well, I appreciate y'all introducing yourselves and sharing a bit of your stories. There's, like I said, there's a little bit of every sort of background. People, again, who are brand new to the Episcopal Church, people who have been in the Episcopal Church for a long time but are new to St. Richard's, and I'm glad that all of you are here. Okay, now is the moment where I'm going to advance the slide and we're going to see what I've already talked about. Oh, I didn't quite say this, okay. Well, I did say the bottom part. So the first bullet point, I'll say a little bit about that. This class is titled Know, Love, Follow for a reason. And it actually comes from St. Richard's Prayer, which I do know is in the successive slides. So when I go over, we'll look at what that prayer actually says. There is a stained glass window of St. Richard's Prayer right inside the red doors of the church. If you enter the red doors, right on your right is a stained glass window of St. Richard, who, again, we'll talk about at the end of our time today. And then on opposite that is a stained glass window with this prayer, a very famous prayer that's attributed to him, which we will go through in a second. But these three verbs, know, love, and follow, are the three verbs that are sort of are the petitions that we would know Jesus more clearly, love him more dearly, and follow him more nearly day by day. That's the famous prayer. And that day by day part gets turned into, in the musical Godspell, probably what it's most famous for is there's a song called Day by Day in the music. If that, that tends to be a touch point for some people. We try not make that like our theme song here, but people do really love it. People love it. And so that's where this class title comes from, is Know, Love, and Follow. And all of the stuff that we'll be talking about, even the stuff that we'll be talking about today, about like what is the Episcopal Church, what is the Anglican Communion, when we talk about those things, because some of you have mentioned those already today, and some of you may be like, I'm not even sure exactly what that's referring to. I mean, even the way that the church is structured really is intended at its best to foster these things. To help us to know Jesus more clearly, love him more dearly, and follow him more nearly day by day. That's what we hope that it all does, the way that we structure ourselves, the way that we... So even though today, like I said, will be a little less, I don't know, there won't be any intrigue in today's lesson, and we won't really debate theology in today's lesson, there's still theology very much present, which is that the way that every church structures itself says something about how it intends to facilitate these three verbs in relation to Jesus. Like I grew up Baptist, as I mentioned, which is a congregationalist tradition, so every congregation sort of governs unto itself. And there are loose affiliations of Baptists, so like the Southern Baptist Convention being the largest one. There's the American Baptist, there's a whole bunch of other ones. But the fundamental unit in a Baptist church is the local church. That's the fundamental unit, whereas we are organized a little bit differently, and there's some theology behind that, so we're going to talk about that today. But let's look at this prayer real quick. Oh, we have a 2. Well, yeah, we do hope new members get their bearings. I do hope that's true. You can grade me on that after. There will not be a survey, but if there was, you could let me know, like 3 stars, would not do again, or whatever. You could sort of tell me. I've already talked about this. We will talk about the history of the Anglican Communion and how it is organized, except that's not really totally true, because we're going to talk about that more in depth next time, actually. But let's look at this prayer, St. Richard's Prayer. Whoa. Excuse you thing. There we go. All right. This is the... This is the prayer, or how it begins. O holy Jesus, merciful friend, brother and redeemer, may I know you more clearly, love you more dearly, and follow you more nearly day by day. Okay, and as I said, this is where it comes from. Now, I put day by day in red here at the end because I actually really love that gets appended, not just because of the Godspell song. That's its own thing. But because this is really, I think, fundamental to the Christian life. That it is something that is lived out, first of all, and that it is something that is lived out every single day. There's not a point at which you arrive at like Christian perfection. You just don't get there, at least this side of eternity. And because this is, the reason I want to draw attention to that is because this does serve as an adult confirmation class. A lot of times there's this idea about confirmation, and if you're like, I don't even know what that is, that's okay too. We'll talk about that later. But there's this idea that those certain touchstones are, especially when youths get confirmed. If you have youth confirmation, this I think is a danger that you can fall into, that they feel like they've somehow graduated from church, right? They've like graduated, like, well, I'm confirmed now, as if that's going to... and I always say that actually confirmation is never the end of any part of your Christian journey. It actually is really the beginning of it, especially if you were baptized as an infant. I mean, I was not. We don't do that in the Baptist church. I was baptized when I was 11. But if you are baptized as an infant, confirmation is very, very important in the sense that it is your reaffirmation of your baptism and is the start of the journey, not the end, right? And so I really love that the day-by-day exists in there because this really is where we live out our Christian faith, is truly daily, right? Like every single day, it's both a set of choices that we make to follow Jesus, but also we never reach the end of doing it. There's always more to know. There's always more mystery to explore, and so it is something that we do daily. So at the end of this class, you may know, love, and follow a little bit better, maybe, but like you're not going to have graduated. So that's I guess what I'm trying to say here. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the history of Anglicanism in 10 minutes or less. This is kind of a challenge that I give to myself, and I don't really ever succeed, okay? Because this is like hundreds of years of history. But when we talk about how we're structured and why, I think it is a little bit helpful to do a little bit of a whirlwind history, okay? So I'm going to get all my bullet points up here, okay? So some of you, right, have talked about how you either have Roman Catholic backgrounds or, you have Roman Catholic backgrounds, right? And so you probably have noticed, or maybe even one of the things that you like about the Episcopal Church is that it feels churchy to you, because our worship is, why can't we, I don't know why we can't reprogram this timer. There we go. Oh, very good. Thank you. Because our worship, there we go, the style of our worship, the trappings of our worship, the shape of our worship, the ritual of our worship looks and feels very Catholic, but our theology is Protestant. And so some people wonder, what does that mean? How did we get there? Some people jokingly refer to us as Catholic light, right? Which is fine. This doesn't bother me. But we do. We trace our history to the English Reformation, which through a couple of accidents of history ended up preserving a number of the sort of ritualistic elements of Roman Catholicism, while more radical strands of Protestantism were happening in Europe. And there was some of that in England too. You think about the Puritans, if you have to think back to history class basically. There were some very radical Protestants in England as well, but because the Church of England was an established church, it provided it a little bit of stability in maintaining some of the ritual and practice from the Roman Catholic roots from which it sprung. And this largely had to do with a thing called the Book of Common Prayer, which even just this morning, there was a visitor this morning who was asking about. I noticed that there's no Bibles in the pews, but there's this red book with a cross on it, and it was the Book of Common Prayer. What is the Book of Common Prayer? And the Book of Common Prayer is actually super, super important. We're going to talk about it more in greater depth next time. That's when I say we're going to really talk about the history. The Book of Common Prayer started out essentially as the Roman Catholic Mass translated into English. Because in the Middle Ages, at the time of the Reformation, Mass was said in Latin, right? Mass was said in Latin, so you didn't actually have church done in the vernacular. But then there were certain ideas that started to be floated by a guy named Martin Luther, who we may be familiar with, who nailed those 95 Theses to the Wittenberg church door. And I don't know if, I like to believe is very cinematically, like in a movie. And that's what kicked it off. But regardless, we ended up in England with this thing called the Book of Common Prayer, which had a few different iterations early on and sort of started out as literally just an English translation of the Roman Catholic Mass. But then, it's as the Church of England was going to be decidedly Protestant, because there was some back and forth there. It wasn't clear for a little while. There was a whole thing with Queen Elizabeth I and the Tudors and the Stuarts. We'll talk more about that later. Where it wasn't really, it was a little iffy. Was England going to be Protestant or not? We don't really know. It was all sort of kicked off by Henry VIII. And rather cynically, a lot of people like to talk about how the Church of England was started because Henry VIII wanted to get a divorce, right? He wanted his marriage annulled. It was the king who had like a whole bunch of wives, right? Not all at the same time, mind you. But because he was not producing a male heir, and this was a really, really big problem. And but the thing is the Pope had actually annulled King Henry's marriages before. That was not the problem. It started to become a problem because there was a little bit of a tussle between the spiritual power, we might say, of the Pope and the temporal power of the Pope. That the Pope controlled certain lands and was wanting to dictate how things in England were done. And Henry was like, no, I'm the king of England. Like, you're the Pope. You can talk about heaven or whatever, but like, I'm the king of England, so you can't, And that was sort of what kicked off the idea of England as a Protestant nation, because Henry found, this is a gross oversimplification, but basically, Henry found a convenient way of justifying his rule over England by saying, you know what, well, the Church of England could be Protestant, we could do that. And it sort of went back and forth. But all that to say, it took a little while for the theology of the Reformation to make its way into the English church, but eventually it did, and it was preserved in this thing called the Book of Common Prayer, which, interestingly enough, the English don't really use. So if you go to England now, and you go to a Church of England parish, they may, as like a token, have little books of common prayer somewhere in there, but they actually, the official Book of Common Prayer is still the edition from the 1600s. And so, still today, that's still the official Book of Common Prayer in England. And so what they use is something that looks a lot more like what we do in our 10:30 Rite 2 service at St. Richard's. In England, it's called Common Worship. So you may be wondering, well, that's all great. That has a lot to do with England, but we're not in England. So how did we happen, right? Well, the Episcopal Church traces its lineage to the Church of England. When folks came over from England to settle in the New World, they brought with them their prayer books and their church. And so there were parishes set up along the East Coast, especially in places like Virginia, that were Church of England parishes to begin with. They were sort of missions of the Church of England. Then there was this, again, we'll talk more about this next time. This is when it gets kind of exciting. But there was this thing called the American Revolution. We may have heard of it. We may be familiar with it. And after it happened, we were no longer under the crown. So all of these Church of England churches that were now in the colonies had to figure out, well, what does that mean for us? If we're no longer Church of England, what are we? And long story short, it became the Episcopal Church. Okay, and we'll talk a lot more about that next time, because that was a huge oversimplification, but I gave myself 10 minutes or less, so that's all I've got, okay? But the reason that I say that, okay, is because it is related to the way that we are structured and governed, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that before we move on? Like I said, we'll go in depth on that next week. It is actually really exciting, because there's a lot of like England getting mad at us and us being mad at England, and everybody's sort of, well, the Scots also hate England and they helped us out, and anyway, it's a whole thing. So let's talk about this. So what happened, what became of all of these formerly Church of England parishes is they, in the United States, became part of the Episcopal Church. The word Episcopal, coming from the Greek word episkopos, which means bishop, because we were a church with bishops. The Church of England retained this order of ministry where you had bishops, priests, and deacons, right? The threefold orders of ministry, much like you would find in the Roman Catholic Church. However, the authority, there's no like pope in Anglicanism. We don't have that. Although the Archbishop of Canterbury is symbolically very important for us. But if the Archbishop of Canterbury appeared here at St. Richard's next week, that would be super cool, but he could not tell me what to do. Whereas if I'm a Roman Catholic priest and the Pope arrives at my church on a Sunday, the Pope can tell me whatever and I just have to do it, right? So the authority works a little bit different. Now, if the Episcopal Bishop of Texas, who I've got some pictures of here in a minute, showed up here next week, I would have to do what he tells me to do, okay? Because our fundamental unit is the diocese, not the whole. We'll talk about that in a minute, okay? But anyway, so Anglicanism. There were also other Church of England parishes in other places that also began to win for themselves their independence. And so all of these churches and all of these various nations that trace their missional lineage back to the Church of England became referred to as Anglican. And we sort of kicked that off. And so that now is called the Anglican Communion, and that is the third largest Christian body in the world. Roughly 85 million Christians worldwide are Anglicans. The Episcopal Church of the United States, the Anglican Church of Canada, there's churches in South America. I mean, even the Episcopal Church, I've got a map of this in a minute, is actually an international denomination. We have a diocese in Haiti. We have, it's actually the largest diocese in the Episcopal Church, is the Diocese of Haiti. Taiwan, we've got a couple of parishes in Europe. Anyway, but there are huge Anglican presences in other countries. In fact, the largest country of Anglicans in the world is Nigeria, believe it or not, Nigeria. And we actually have at St. Richard's a few Nigerian families who live here in the Austin area who come to St. Richard's who, I mean, that's their thing. They were, they're Anglicans from Nigeria, so this is where they go to church, right? And so the Anglican Communion is pretty cool. Like I said, we're the third largest Christian body in the world after the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox. And we are divided up into things called provinces. And those are just individual constituent churches. So like the Episcopal Church is a province of the Anglican Communion, okay? And then, anyway, but this is confusing because there's also provinces within the Episcopal Church. All of this is confusing. There's no quiz, okay? There's no quiz. But this is just to sort of give you an idea, again, of how we're structured and what we mean when we say the Episcopal Church. So the Diocese of Texas, for instance, where we're in right now, is in Province 7 of the Episcopal Church, okay? Which encompasses part of Louisiana, all of Arkansas, all of Texas, part of Missouri, and parts of New Mexico, and then all of Oklahoma and Kansas, okay? That's Province 7 of the Episcopal Church. And there's a bunch of different dioceses that are in Province 7. In fact, in the state of Texas, because the Diocese of Texas is not the entire state, where Kate just moved here from, is technically a different diocese. San Antonio, which is not that far down the road, is the Diocese of West Texas. And then there's the Diocese of the Rio Grande, the Diocese of Dallas, the Diocese of North Texas, what used to be Fort Worth but is now part of the Diocese of Texas. I feel like I'm leaving one out. I did. Texas is a big place. Okay, so there's a lot of dioceses in Texas, but we are the Diocese of Texas, which stretches from South Austin up now all the way to Fort Worth, and then over all the way to Longview, and down all the way basically south of Houston a little bit. I think to Matagorda is about as far south. Anyway, and that's the Diocese of Texas, which is where we reside. I should probably, okay. So member churches in more than 165 countries in the Anglican Communion, 41 provinces, which are subdivided into dioceses, and dioceses into parishes and deaneries. So, like I said, there's no quiz on this. But a diocese is literally just a group of parishes in a geographical location. And a diocese is overseen, which is literally what bishop means. Episkopos means overseer. A bishop oversees a diocese. They're the sort of chief pastoral shepherd of the diocese. The Diocese of Texas is so large that we have multiple bishops, but only one of them is the Bishop of Texas. And his name's Andy Doyle, and he himself will joke with you that he looks kind of like a church version of Guy Fieri. If anybody watches Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, It's pretty accurate, actually. Okay. All right, let's see. I will say that all provinces, so I mentioned the Book of Common Prayer, all provinces have their own prayer book. So like we have a Book of Common Prayer that was ratified in 1979. So our prayer book that's in our pews is from 79. The Church of England, like I said, is still from 1662. And they tried to have an updated version, but because they're an established church, Parliament has to pass a new prayer book. Like imagine if you had to do something for church and like Congress had to pass it. Would never get done, actually. You'd never have it, which is exactly what happened to the Church of England. That's why they still don't have a new prayer book. Is they, early in the 20th century, they went to all this work to revise and update their prayer book with modern language in it, and Parliament was just like, no, we're not going to do that. And so they still have 1662. So anyway, but other provinces have their own prayer books. Some of them are actually quite popular. The New Zealand prayer book, for instance, I don't know why this is, but a lot of Episcopalians really love the New Zealand prayer book. But anyway, there you go. But the only one that is really authorized for our use is our prayer book, the 79 prayer book. Anyway, okay. Here's a map. Like I said, I promised you a map. This is all of the constituent parts of the Anglican Communion. And I'm sure y'all can read this too, can't you? You know, all of these. But anyway, no, you don't have to read it to see that it is truly global, right? There are Anglican churches in almost every single part of the world, which is pretty cool. All right, so I think I've already just said this about the fundamental unit of communion is the diocese, but nevertheless, let's talk a little bit about this. So, how are we organized? So in the Episcopal Church, we get together every 3 years for a thing called General Convention, okay? And General Convention is broken into 2 houses. It's where we get together and we worship together and argue a lot, is kind of what happens. And then we vote on things and go home. That's what General Convention is. But basically, every diocese in the Episcopal Church elects delegates to go to General Convention every 3 years. There's one coming up, actually this next year, in Louisville, Kentucky, is the host. And delegates are elected from every diocese, then go. There's 2 sort of houses of governance in General Convention. There's the House of Deputies, which is comprised of clergy and laity from all over the church. And then there's the House of Bishops, which is comprised of bishops. If it feels a little bit like Congress and the Senate, that's because the same people who came up with the House of Representatives and the Senate were the same ones who came up actually with the House of Deputies and the House of Bishops, more or less, because they were people like George Washington, who were figuring both out at the same time. So the Episcopal Church is a representative denomination, and it's actually the most representative denomination by population of any denomination in the United States. And what I mean by that is, there are, I think, over 800 and something delegates that go to a General Convention, which proportionally is the most representative of the number of members. Is that making sense? I'm sure there's a better way of saying that, and I'm struggling to figure out how to say it. But anyway, and a lot of the stuff that we do, we vote on. Not just at General Convention, but also at the diocesan level. Every year there's a thing called Diocesan Council. It happens in Texas every February. This year it's going to be hosted in Waco, and if you get confirmed, you can actually serve as a delegate and go to council. And it's actually a lot of fun. I enjoy council. We don't really argue at council. That's only at General Convention. But everything is decided by vote, by majority vote. And we believe, actually, like I said, that's how we're structured, but there's some theology behind that. And the theology behind that is we believe that the Holy Spirit works through the body of Christ, which is the church. And the Holy Spirit doesn't just work through the clergy or whatever, but actually through the whole church. In the Catechism of the Episcopal Church, which is in the back of the prayer book, and it's like this big, if you're Roman Catholic and you hear the word catechism, you're probably thinking like, a phone book or something. Or Lutheran. Lutherans kind of have a big one too. But in the Catechism, it's specified what are the orders of ministry, and laity is listed first. And that is actually very purposeful, because clergy don't just pop out of nowhere, right? The laity really are the ones who do the ministry. Clergy have a specific role to play. We have a specific calling within the body. But laity, bishops, priests, and deacons is what is listed there. And so the theology behind the way that we govern ourselves and the way that we interact with one another is the way it is because we believe that the Holy Spirit works through this messy process of relationship and all of that stuff that we do, which I think is kind of cool. I actually really like that. As I mentioned, the fundamental unit of the communion is the diocese. So there is a person who I've got a picture of on the next slide. We'll talk about this person. So there are bishops of dioceses, but then there's a thing called the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, who is elected, and they serve a 9-year term, so 3 general conventions, okay? Our presiding bishop right now is a guy named Michael Curry, who used to be the Bishop of North Carolina. And what was I about to say about that? Oh, yeah. And much like the Archbishop of Canterbury could show up at St. Richard's next week, and it would be super cool, and we'd be like really excited. We'd be like, why did you show up randomly? I guess to buy pumpkins at the patch. I don't know. He was busy and wanted to come check it out. And so, but he couldn't tell me what to do. He couldn't, like, make me change something about our liturgy or anything like that, Similarly, the presiding bishop couldn't either, because the person who's in charge of St. Richard's, in a sense, is, again, Andy Doyle, the Bishop of Texas. And all of the constituent dioceses in the Episcopal Church are basically affiliated with one another through mutual affection. And so that is what the Episcopal Church is. So even though we have a thing called the presiding bishop does have duties and responsibilities and a role to play, and it's an important job. But it is not, we have a hierarchical in some ways, but not centralized governance. So the presiding bishop can't order other bishops around, but the presiding bishop is very important. Does that make sense? Okay. And the reason I talk so much about that is because, again, I think that is one of the fundamental distinctions between how Episcopalians understand the function of a bishop versus the way Roman Catholics might understand the function of a bishop. Okay. So who are these people? Well, this guy over here on the far left, your left, is the Archbishop of Canterbury currently, Justin Welby. And next to him, they both look very happy, is a guy named Stephen Cottrell. He's the Bishop of York, or the Archbishop rather, of York. And historically, both of these are very important. The Archbishop of Canterbury is sort of the figurehead in many ways for the Anglican Communion because Christianity came to England kind of as a mission through Canterbury, and that was the home base. So that's why the Archbishop of Canterbury is so important. And then the Archbishop of York is actually like the chief bishop of England, which I know, anyway, doesn't maybe make much sense. But when things get really old, you get weird things like that, right? But anyway, so that's who they are. And then this guy over here is Michael Curry, who is the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, but not for much longer, actually. His term's almost up. I think they elect a new one at next year, actually. Yeah. So, and he is a phenomenal preacher. If you've ever heard him preach, there was, I think in one of these slide decks, actually, I have a clip of one of his sermons. He is an incredible preacher, very, very energetic preacher. All right, so this is Andy Doyle, the Episcopal, or the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Texas. And as I said, is a little bit like the bishop version of Guy Fieri. I see a knowing nod here. Yes, yes. He's been bishop in Texas for a long time, right? I can't remember the exact year of his consecration, but he was elected bishop rather young, actually, and still there. Probably still going to be bishop for a little while, though everybody thinks he's going to get elected presiding bishop. He denies it, and he says he's not even going to run and be on the slate, but we don't believe that. We think we're not really sure about that. Clergy conference is in a couple weeks, and I think we all have a pool going as to whether or not he's going to be on the slate. In fact, with every letter he sends to us saying that he's not going to, we feel he's definitely going to, right? But anyway. And then, who are these people? Well, these people are all the other bishops, assisting bishops who are in the Diocese of Texas. On the far left over here is Kay Ryan, who is actually here in Austin. So she's probably the bishop actually who will come to visit in February or January or February. We still don't have our bishop's visitation date, and this is much to our frustration. But she'll probably be the one to come and see us, and she is based here in Austin. Jeff Fisher, next to her, is in Tyler, and then Scott Mayer is actually the bishop of North Texas, but was filling in provisionally in Fort Worth, which is now part of the Diocese of Texas. Again, there's no quiz on this, but anyway. And then this guy on the far end over here, the far right, is Hector Monteroso. He is actually from Costa Rica. We have a partnership with the Diocese of Costa Rica. But he is now based in Houston and is an assisting bishop in the Diocese of Texas. And so we are very fortunate to have a lot of bishops because in theory that means it's easier to get a hold of them and to get your bishop's visitation date. But as I just said, we still don't have that. And I probably shouldn't, I'm not going to post this on the internet because I don't need my bishops to hear my passive-aggressive frustration in the video. But anyway, these are the other ones. And they're all really wonderful, actually, really, really wonderful. And Kay Ryan in particular is just a gem of a person, and I really, really appreciate her leadership and relationship. They're all wonderful. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about our story, St. Richard's. Okay, yeah, and then we're doing okay. I can't tell time on my watch. Okay, so let's talk about our story. History of St. Richard's. I'm going to go ahead and put these up here. So this guy over here, looking steely-eyed, staring off into the distance, is a guy named Malcolm Riker. Malcolm is a sort of legendary priest in the Diocese of Texas. Malcolm was... I believe he was in the Navy. It's probably in my notes, but I'm getting ahead already. Anyway, he came back from World War II and got ordained, and he went on a tear planting churches. He planted, I think again, all this is in my notes, and so I'm going to just start telling you things and then get the details wrong. But he planted, I think, a total of 13 congregations, but 8 of those in the Austin area. And almost all of them are still vibrant going concerns today, which is really remarkable because planting churches is a little bit like opening a restaurant. The failure rate is extremely high, okay? It's like very, very high. So the fact that he planted all of these parishes and they took root and they grew and they're still there today is really, really remarkable. St. Richard's was one of the last churches that he planted. In fact, it may be the last church that he planted. And he did so while he was full-time rector of St. Luke's on the Lake, which is out back that way. And so I can't imagine being full-time somewhere and planting not one, because he wasn't just planting St. Richard's, he was also planting, I think, St. Christopher's maybe, but 2 churches at the same time. And what he would do is Sunday mornings he'd be at St. Luke's, and then in the evenings he would go and do services for these church plants. He was crazy. Anyway, but St. Richard's was one of his plants. And he planted St. Richard's on the nation's bicentennial, July 4th, 1976. Okay, so that's why if you've been here over the summer, we do a really big July 4th thing because it's the founding of the church. So we like to eat a lot of food and do stuff on that day. Let's see. Oh, here are the churches that he planted, like I said, 8 congregations across the Austin area: St. Mark's, St. Luke's, St. John's, St. Matthew's, St. Albans, St. Christopher's, and St. Paul's, and then us. And I think of that number, St. Paul's, I think, is in Pflugerville is the only one I think that has closed. I don't think any of the other ones have. But like St. Matt's is actually a pretty big church. St. Luke's, very healthy church. Anyway, and so very, very impressive. And he also had a lot of vision, because at the time that he was planting these churches, some of the communities, like Round Rock was extremely small, but some of the places he put these churches, there was like nobody out there. Truly, they weren't even communities yet. But he had this vision that, well, Austin's going to grow and we need churches to be out here, and he was right. He was right. How he would do this is he would take this small group of individuals from one parish and he would use them to plant the next church. So he would take a group, and he would often actually take some of the wealthiest parishioners to go and plant the church, because he knew that the church was going to need capital. And this was always much to the chagrin of the congregation that he was stealing them from, right? So he would take them and go to the next place. But as I said, though, it was very successful. We found in the offices, I was mentioning this to a couple people before we got started today, we actually found in the offices the newspaper clipping of the advertising the first services at St. Richard's back in the 1970s. And we framed it, and it's now hanging by the left door as you go into the nave of the church. It's there on the wall, and I invite you to go check it out. But yeah, it was crazy. But it was also at a time, what I find so interesting, I've done some reading about him and about his church plants, and he would do things like post in the newspaper an advertisement for confirmation class. And no joke, 150 people would show up. And it's my goodness, I wish that's how it worked. If we could just put something out there and have 100 people, yeah, it would be just incredible. But that was what would happen, right? And so anyway, he was also known for when he would go door to door and invite everybody in the neighborhood to come to church. I mean, he really, I don't know how he maintained that level of energy, okay, but that was what he did. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, I am now the 5th rector of St. Richard's. After Malcolm got it up and running, a church plant in the Episcopal Church starts out as something called a mission. Once you reach a certain size and a certain level of sustainability, you can then become a parish, okay? And it's actually really cool when this happens. Usually there's a couple of places every single year that become parishes or reach parish status. And at diocesan council, they are welcomed, because when you're a mission, you don't get a vote at diocesan council. Only parishes get votes. And so when you become a parish, you get your delegation, gets seated at council. And at least how they do it in the Diocese of Texas is there's usually you invite a lot of members of your church to come out to council, and they process in, making a whole bunch of noise and cheering and hooting and hollering, and you go up and you ring this gigantic bell. I mean, it's like this high. It's on this big stand. It's called the Great Commission Bell, and you ring it, and it clangs, and everybody yells and cheers. And it's sort of the official welcoming you as a parish. And it's always just this super cool moment, because you can see on the faces of everybody who's there, it's hard work being a mission. It's very scrappy work being a mission, and everybody has to pitch in. A lot of times if you're a mission, it means that you may not have a full-time clergy person, and if you do, you're doing it at great sacrifice and expense, and it's very, very challenging. And so to see them ring the bell and everybody welcome them in that way is always just such this cool moment. So we were a mission for a little while, and then Sid Gervais was sent out here to help kick us up a notch, basically, and he ended up being the first rector of St. Richard's. And very sadly and tragically passed away just not that long ago, actually. I did his funeral. It was a little over a year ago. And there's a portrait of him now hanging outside the vesting room. He was a fiery little guy from Louisiana, and was an awesome, awesome man. And he was rector here all the way until the early 1990s. and so oversaw St. Richard's going from a mission to a parish. He was succeeded by a guy named Seth Deliri, who is still around, actually did a wedding here not that long ago, and hangs out at St. Matt's down in Austin most of the time, North Austin. And Seth Deliri, at the time that Seth was here, St. Richard's was actually what is now, what do they call themselves? The sign says FCC. Fellowship Faith Community Church? Whatever. It's just right down here, a little bit further down 79. The church was right next to Brushy Creek. You sort of drove down into this little ravine. I've been down in there, and I've heard stories about how if it rained too much, you couldn't really get to church because it would flood out the driveway. And anyway, we were there for a long time until the early 1990s, mid-1990s, when money was raised to purchase this property and to build first the main worship space of the church in this building, and then later this building over here. And that was under Seth Deliri's tenure. Then we had a rector named Mary Wilson after Seth for a while, and then a rector named Stu Shelby, who was the fourth rector of St. Richard's, and it was under his tenure that this building was built, and I succeed him. So I'm Rector 5, basically. So there we go. And we're really close. We're really close here. So we're going to talk now. We've talked about the structure of the Anglican Communion a little bit. We've talked about the structure of the Episcopal Church. And now we're going to talk about the structure of St. Richard's. So like, how does St. Richard's actually work? Okay. So the structure of a parish looks a little bit like this. Parishes have things called rectors. That's me. A rector is a canonical designation, okay? And rectors have certain responsibilities. We have certain things that we not only have to do, but also certain things that we can do in the life of the diocese that are defined in the canons of the church. If you're a mission, you can't have a rector of a mission. Missions, by definition, don't have rectors. They have priests in charge or vicars or whatever, but they don't have rectors. The rector oversees the staff of the church. So that's, but I am not like solely in charge. The people who are really in charge are actually the vestry. Okay, many people would argue the people who are really in charge is actually the altar guild. Okay, but and the altar guild are the people who set up for the church services and all that sort of stuff, and they're wonderful. We have a great altar guild, and I love them. But no, the vestry is a little bit like the board of trustees for the church in a way, except that the vestry is meant to be a lot more hands-on than that. The vestry is the legal entity that is St. Richard's. So like if St. Richard's were to sell part of our property or to buy new property or whatever, it's not me that's actually in charge of that. It's the vestry. The vestry are the ones who actually sign the paperwork and all of that. The vestry set the budget and approve the budget. I don't do that. It's for many good reasons, actually. And but one of those is accountability. It also is because St. Richard's is not my church. I have the privilege and honor of serving it and being here and shepherding it. But St. Richard's existed before I got here. It'll exist, Lord willing, well after I am gone, whenever that time is. And so the church is really the vestry in many ways. Again, my role is to preach, teach, and administer the sacraments. We're going to talk about that with the prayer book talk. But a lot of people think that, oh, well, you're the senior minister, you're in charge of things. And I'm like, maybe. Depends on what it is. Depends on what it is. I'm in charge of the worship life of the church. I oversee that and things like that. But the actual governance and day-to-day workings of the church is really overseen by the vestry. We have a 12-member vestry at St. Richard's, but you can have as few as 3 and as many as 21, I think, is the most they'll allow you to have in Texas. I can't remember, but something like that. We have 12. And you serve a 3-year term on the vestry. You have to be confirmed and a member in good standing to serve on the vestry. And vestry members, like most things in the Episcopal Church, are elected. They're voted on. They're approved by the congregation each year at something called annual meeting, which will happen in January. And we'll have a whole new slate of vestry members who will join up. Now, there are 2 members of the vestry that are super special, and they are called the senior warden and the junior warden. There's also the clerk, who I guess is also special, but the clerk mostly just takes meeting minutes, and nobody ever wants to be the clerk on the vestry, okay? We always have to pull teeth to get that one. But the junior warden is in charge mostly of buildings and grounds. Our junior warden for the last few years has been Jeff Kreck, who is incredible. And Jeff's done an amazing job. But the junior warden oversees, like, if the lights go out or whatever, or if we have if we've got an air conditioner that needs repair, the junior warden typically handles most of that, getting the people out to fix it and that kind of thing. Then the senior warden acts as both support and, we'll just say support, basically, for the rector, in a sense. There's some other duties as well, but that's basically that. We also have a finance committee headed up by our treasurer, who sort of helps to advise the vestry on matters pertaining to church finance. And then, of course, we have other ministry leaders. So I mentioned the Altar Guild. They help set up for services. They help run liturgical stuff. We have vergers. Ken is a verger. You've probably seen them on Sunday. They're the people in the black robes with the sticks, right? So you got to really watch for the vergers. They sort of help coordinate things liturgically. We have, all sorts of ministries at the church that do all sorts of things, and we all work together to make the church happen. So that's kind of the structure of St. Richard's. So this is the last thing we're going to talk about, is who was St. Richard. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions? I know this is like drinking from a fire hose, and it's a lot of stuff, and like I said, next week's is going to be a little more exciting material-wise. But yes?
I've always wanted to know, if you're Anglican, that means you are Episcopalian, or vice versa, or how does the Anglican and Episcopalian really get together?
Yes, that's a great question. So if you are an Episcopalian, you are an Anglican. But if you are an Anglican, you are not necessarily Episcopalian. It's kind of like all bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon kind of thing, right? Something like that. So for instance, if you are a member of any of those other, like when I had that map up, right? Say you're a member of the Anglican Church of Canada. You are an Anglican, but you're obviously not Episcopalian because you're a member of the Anglican Church of Canada. That's their version of the Episcopal Church, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with, the Scottish Episcopal Church. They are Anglican, but I guess they technically are Episcopalian. It's in their name, but not us. They're not us. They're their own church, right? So that's kind of how it works. Is all Episcopalians are Anglicans, but not all Anglicans are Episcopalians. But good question, though. Anyone else before we talk about who St. Richard was, and then.
You want to clarify, if you're going to talk about that, you want to clarify other Anglican church?
Oh yeah, we can talk about that too. I'll do that at the end. We'll talk about who St. Richard was, and we'll come back around to that one. That is a good question, good topic. Okay, so who is St. Richard? Now I will tell you that the reason St. Richard's is named St. Richard's. Remember when I was talking about Malcolm Riker? So Malcolm really liked alliteration. And so, when he was planting a church in Round Rock, he wanted a saint that started with R. So a lot of people are like, is there some deep theological meaning behind why St. Richard is the patron saint of the church? And honestly, that is it. It is because Malcolm really liked the way that it sounded. St. Richard's in Round Rock sounded good, like St. Paul's, Pflugerville, or whatever, right? He liked that at a certain point. So that is why we are St. Richard's. I really didn't know much about St. Richard. There's not a whole lot of St. Richards of any kind. There are I've Googled this, and I think there are only 3 St. Richard's churches in the United States. Us, another Episcopal church in Winter Park, Florida, which is weirdly where I served right out of seminary, was in Winter Park, Florida, but anyway. And then there's a Roman Catholic St. Richard's. And I think those are the only 3. He's not a saint that gets a lot of churches. So there we go. So who was he? Who was this St. Richard? Well, here's our window. There's our window. St. Richard, it was Richard of Chichester in England. And here is a little bit about him. He was born in 1197. He died on the 3rd of April, 1253. And so we celebrate Richard every April. You always celebrate a saint on the day of their death. And a few years ago, actually, was pretty cool. Because it was still very COVID, I didn't know, I wanted to do something fun for St. Richard's Day, but I was like, we're still sort of kind of online mostly and all that. And so I reached out to the good folks at Chichester Cathedral in England, and where Richard was bishop all of those many centuries ago. And the chancellor of Chichester Cathedral agreed to hop on Zoom. I guess for him it would have been in the early evening, his time, but during a Sunday morning, and he told us about St. Richard and how, and what. Anyway, it was pretty neat. It's still on our YouTube channel, actually, if you go back in there. The guy's name was Dan Inman, and really nice guy. And anyway, but yeah, so Richard was a real guy who lived in a real place called Chichester. He was the Bishop of Chichester from 1244 to 1253, and he ran afoul of King Henry III. So this is prior to the Reformation by kind of a couple centuries. And but nevertheless, there was still tension between the kings and the church. And this, again, had to do with power and authority. So part of the way that you became a bishop is that you were sort of kind of appointed, sort of kind of voted on in a way. And there was a guy that, let me see if I can find this in my notes here. Okay, let me see. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, basically, Henry III wanted one of his buddies to be the bishop. But the Pope felt like, no, I don't want that guy to be the bishop. And so instead, well, it wasn't, yeah, it was Pope Boniface. Anyway, the guy that Henry wanted to be a bishop, whose name was Robert, something I'm not going to try to pronounce, okay? It looks like Passalui, which probably means it's like pass away or something like that, but I'm not going to try to, anyway. That guy, Robert, was friends with Henry, and Henry wanted him to be bishop. He didn't become bishop, and instead Richard became bishop. And, oh no, I accidentally exited out, but hopefully we'll recover. Anyway, while we're waiting on that, okay, there it is. So essentially what happened is Henry was like, well, since I'm so mad about this, I'm going to do everything I can to actually make it hard for you to be bishop. So it was like, you're not allowed to live in the big bishop house. You're not allowed to use the bishop horse and carriage. You're not allowed to do all this stuff. And people could be arrested if they offer you hospitality. Okay, so this was what King Henry was willing to do in order to make life challenging for Richard. But this actually backfired marvelously, because what ended up happening is Richard was just like, okay, well, I can't use the house or the horse or whatever, that's fine. So he just like walked around from village to village in his diocese, and people would house him against the rules, but they would put him up in their house, and he became incredibly beloved because he was seen as this man of the people. I mean, this was a time, part of what precipitated the Protestant Reformation was that the church was starting to get a little excessive, right? The church was really insanely wealthy. They were hoarding power. They were taking advantage of people in very abusive sort of ways. And so in the midst of all of this, Richard was truly like a man of the people. And his people in the diocese loved him. They really, really loved him. He was very, very popular. And he also instituted a number of clerical reforms, which also proved to be pretty popular as well. He, for instance, let me see if I can find the list of some of what he did. Well, basically, all of his reforms essentially were like, you know what, you're a member of the clergy, you should actually act like a man of God. That was basically, and people were like, you know what, that's probably right. And so again, Richard was very, very popular. When he died on his deathbed is when he was, supposedly when he said this prayer that was ascribed to him. Now, the prayer that we have today that's actually in the stained glass window, That was collected sort of later. There's a few different versions of St. Richard's Prayer that exist in various manuscripts. The original one was probably much simpler and a little less poetic, but nevertheless, it caught on, and it became associated with him. And so anyway, now he became a saint of the church, but in order to become a saint, some of you may know this already, you've got to have performed miracles. Right? You have to have done some miracles to be a saint. And so one of the miracles that is attributed to St. Richard, which is depicted actually in our window, is that it is said that he knocked a chalice of consecrated wine off of the altar and it landed upright on the floor and didn't spill a drop of the blood of Christ, right? And so this is why he's sort of, like, look at this. Look at what I've done. It didn't spill, because there's the chalice down there on the ground. And so I always think that he should really be the patron saint of, like, nervous seminarians or whatever, because it always, you're just so afraid you're going to hit the cup or whatever, and it's going to go everywhere. But anyway, so that's a little bit about St. Richard of Chichester. And I do know that a group from here some years ago went to Chichester. There's some pictures of some of this over here in the entranceway of the parish hall. But anyway, so that's a little bit about him. And like I said, I wish I could tell you that there was some really deep and poignant theological reason why we're named after him, but it's just because it starts with R. So anyway, and apparently there's not loads of saints that start with R. So there we have it. But he is a very good Anglican saint, even though he is pre-Reformation. But being the Bishop of Chichester, that feels like, a place that your Episcopal Church should be named after somehow. So there it is. All right, so that's what I have for today. And like I said, I know that was a lot. I know it was a lot of random stuff, seemingly. But I think it's, like I said, I wanted to establish a sort of baseline about, well, what do we mean when we say Episcopal Church? What does that mean? How is that, what does that look like? And what do we mean when we say things like Anglican and Anglican communion? What does that look like? Because especially next week, but in the other sessions that we're gonna cover, all of those will just be terms that we're going to toss around. And so all of this was sort of general knowledge that I feel like may not be the most exciting to learn about. Like, I don't know, unless you just really love governance and structure, which you may, people do. But I believe it's kind of important because it sets the framework for what we'll talk about in future weeks, where we'll talk about the Book of Common Prayer and the theology behind it and why we have it, and also, like I said, what our practices are and things like that. Okay, so in our last couple of minutes together, does anybody have any follow-up questions? Anything clarifying?
He was a bishop, and his day was 4-3-1-2-5-3.
That's right. Yes.
The day dedicated to him, 04-03-12-5-3.
Yeah, yep. That's right.
I think Chichester is in England.
It is. That's exactly right. Yeah, it is. So again, it kind of links us back to our roots a little bit. Yeah. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Really, really appreciate it. And I'm glad y'all were here, like I said. And we'll meet same time, same place next week to talk about the Book of Common Prayer more specifically. And like I said, that'll get a little saucier. My slide deck for that one's a little more fun than it is for this one. But I do appreciate it because, like I said, we'll be talking about terms and things and structures that, if we don't talk about this today, really won't make as much sense as we move forward. So I appreciate y'all's patience today, and I hope you learned at least something, not just about the Episcopal Church, but also about St. Richard's and our founding. Because one of the things to me that always is, one of the things that appealed to me personally about the Episcopal Church, and some of you who have Roman Catholic backgrounds, this might not be as revelatory to you because y'all talk about the traditions in the church, but as a Baptist, I was just thrilled to have some sort of link to something prior to 1890, because that was about as old as we got, And And so because us sitting in this room today, we are connected very much to St. Richard, not just because our church is named after him, but because we do trace. I mean, if you were to draw this whole tree of, the people who planted this church and this church and this church and this church, from Malcolm on to here to here to here, we'd eventually end up with Richard, right? And then it would go on from there and go even further back and further back and further back. And so I'm always struck by this sort of tangibility of our relationship to all of those who've come before, which is how we're here today. So thank you, guys. All right. Class dismissed, I guess. I don't know what else to say.